Planning a fishing trip shouldn't feel like a full-time job. With fishingbooker.com, you can find and book the perfect fishing trip within minutes. Fishingbooker.com connects you with trusted fishing captains around the world. Booking is fast, easy, and secure, with access to verified customer reviews, loyalty rewards, and around-the-clock customer support. Everything you need to book with confidence is in one place. So head to fishingbooker.com and start planning your next fishing adventure today.
Could AI help you do more of what you love? Workday is the AI platform for HR and finance that actually knows your business. We help you handle the have-to-dos so you can focus on the can't-wait-to-dos. It's a new Workday.
Long before refrigeration, before freezers, before even reliable drying in some climates, there was smoke. Smoke drifting through simple structures, over racks of fish, strips of meat, birds hanging from beams. It kept insects away, it slowed spoilage, and over time people realized it did something else too. It changed the food, it deepened it, preserved it. It transformed it into something that could last not just days, but weeks, and even sometimes longer. Today we're talking about hot and cold smoking, how it works, why it matters, and how it fits into a modern wild food lifestyle.
Join Justin Townsend and the Harvesting Nature crew as they explore the world of cooking wild fish and game while sharing recipes, tips, tricks, and lessons learned from their pursuit of wild food. We sure hope you ate before the show, 'cause you're gonna leave hungry. This is the Wild Fish and Game Podcast.
Welcome back to the Wild Pantry. In the last couple of episodes, we've talked about curing, freezing, and even drying. Curing was about controlling microbes, freezing was about pausing time, drying was about removing water entirely. Smoking sits somewhere in between. It can preserve food, but it also changes it in a way that none of these other methods really do. And before we get too far into this, it's worth saying right up front, smoking, especially cold smoking, comes with some real risk if it's done improperly. So we're going to cover that early, and then we'll revisit kind of as we go. But at its core, smoking is one of the oldest and most effective ways of working with wild food. So let's start with where it comes from. Adam?
Yeah, so smoking is one of those techniques that shows up pretty much everywhere humans have ever lived. Any place where people had access to fire, shelter, and animal protein, you tend to see some version of smoking develop. So it probably developed in a lot of different places at similar times, independently of each other, which is pretty interesting. And pretty much anywhere humans have ever been, there's access to fire and shelter, or else and animal protein, or else there wouldn't be humans there. So smoking kind of runs the gamut of all human civilization and pre-civilization. Indigenous cultures across North America were smoking fish and game and even plant foods long before European contact. And you see similar traditions in Scandinavia with fish, in Eastern Europe with lots of meats and sausages, across Africa with both fish and game, through Asia with a wide range of forms. So it's still practiced around the world today by pretty much every single culture. Even if you want to say a vegetarian culinary culture, one of the best kind of vegan foods out there, I would say, is smoked tofu, which is a pretty tasty way to enjoy tofu. Not everyone enjoys it, but I do like it. And smoked is one of the better ways to do so. So it's kind of just everywhere. And like drying, smoking wasn't just about making food last. It was also about making it very usable. So if you caught a large fish run or harvested a huge animal you couldn't eat right away, you needed a way to extend that food beyond just a few days, or in some hotter climates, a few hours even. Smoking really gave you that. It reduced moisture. It added antimicrobial compounds from the smoke itself. It kept insects off the food, reducing spoilage, and it allowed it to be stored or transported later on, just like drying did. But at the same time, people started to realize that smoked food didn't just last longer. It wasn't just easier to transport. It actually tasted different. It tasted richer and deeper, more complex. Over time, smoking shifted from being purely preservation method into something that was also used intentionally for flavor to bring out those attributes. In a lot of traditional systems, two things were always tied together. You weren't just smoking something to make it taste good, you were smoking because you had to preserve it as well, and the flavor was a byproduct. But today that's pretty much flipped, where you don't really need to preserve anything anymore, smoking it to develop that flavor instead. So it's kind of been flipped on its head. It's become very, very popular in America too, in the States and Canada. There's a lot of smoking culture, there's a lot of smoking devices, and it's really become a massive thing. And it's all about that flavor. You know, having flipped that on its head and approaching it through flavor instead of preservation, really changes how we approach it, but the foundation still remains the same. Smoke was, and in a lot of ways still is, a way of managing time, food, and flavor kind of all at once, which is really interesting how it all crosses over into each other. And it's pretty cool how smoke can just completely alter something and make it so much more delicious. But what's actually happening when we do smoke food, Justin? Like, what's the science behind that?
Funny you ask, Adam. I've got the answers. Well, at a basic level, smoking works because of what's actually in the smoke. Not a lot of people think about this, but it's interesting to dial deeper. So when wood burns, or more accurately, when it smolders, it releases a whole range of compounds. Things like phenols, organic acids, and small amounts of aldehydes. You don't have to worry about remembering the names. We're not going to quiz you at the end of the show. But what they do is really important. They slow down the microbial growth, they prevent oxidation, and it deposit onto the surface of the food. That's what gives smoked food its flavor and some of its preservation qualities. That's why we see that sweet, sweet smoke ring sometimes. And unlike drying, smoking doesn't remove all the moisture. And unlike curing, it doesn't fully control microbial activity on its own. It's more of a partial preservation method. It kind of slows things down, which is why you often see it combined with salting, curing, or even drying. Temperature is the other big factor here. So hot smoking, somewhere between 165 and 250, is cooking the food while exposing it to smoke. Cold smoking, usually under 90 degrees Fahrenheit, it's not cooking the food at all. And that's where things get risky, because you're holding food at a temperature range where bacterial growth can happen pretty quickly, and it doesn't kill them because the temperature is so low. So cold smoking almost always requires prior curing or very careful control, and oftentimes follow-up cooking. So we'll come back to that, but it's important to understand early because hot smoking and cold smoking are doing very different things. Adam, how are people doing it?
Well, there's actually a pretty wide range of ways to get into smoking, and the good news for everyone who is thinking about getting into it is that you don't actually need much to start. In fact, for the majority of human history, we had some sticks lashed together on a rack or a tripod or something and hanging the meat over a smoky, smoldering fire, and that's all it takes, really. But today we have a lot of different ways to control and to create the exact kind of performance that we want out of it. But really, at the simplest level, you can do that with a kettle grill, like a Weber kind of style kettle grill, or even just a basic fire setup like I described. What you're doing is you're controlling heat, airflow, and how the smoke moves over the food. And that's basically it. A basic kettle grill with a 2-zone fire, so coals or wood on one side, food on the other, can handle most hot smoking applications. You just got to be able to control the airflow and the temperature in it. Most of those kettle grills do have the kind of slot airflows that you can spin and control that. They're cheap. It's a flexible method, and once you get used to it, it works really well. You might have a short, steep learning curve just in terms of drying your food out or maintaining temperature, controlling temperature, but they do work really well. I've used them myself, and it's great. But from there, you can move into more purpose-built setups. So now we're talking things like electric smokers, probably one of the most accessible next step. They're usually running somewhere from like $150 to $400 or so, and a lot of people have moved towards these. They can be large or small. They can kind of look like a little beer fridge, or it can be a much bigger unit. They're very consistent temperature because it's just controlled by electricity. Very easy to use. Kind of set and forget it to some degree. Some cons though, you have less control over the smoke intensity. So if you wanted something lightly smoked versus heavily smoked, you can't really control that. And I said it as a pro, but it can be a bit of a con too, that these machines can feel a bit like a set it and forget it. and walk away, and you're just not hands-on much at all. And that's something I don't like about those machines, even though they work great, is that I want to hang out with my food all day if I'm smoking it. I don't want to just set it, walk away, and do other things. I do have time carved out of my life for long food applications, and not everyone does. So, it could be a pro or a con depending on who you are. Next up is like a pellet grill, kind of the pellet grill general category. Those can range from $400 up to, $1,500 or even more. And you're basically just like pouring pellets into a hopper, and they get augered in and slowly burn and smolder, creating the heat and smoke. They're great for precise temperature control, good for really long cooks. But they can be expensive, and they often have a less traditional smoke profile than, using just plain wood. And I find that they also aren't great for multi-purpose. Like, it's hard to get them up really hot to just do like a grill and char. A lot of my friends who have these end up kind of using their green egg or kettle grill alongside the pellet grill to kind of get everything they want out of it. Where I find with a fire, you can just do that right from all over the fire. Then from there, you got your more specialized systems. So think of, like a Bradley smoker that have the little pucks, certain specialized smokers. I think everyone's jumping on the bandwagon now because it's so popular. You can find all sorts of different types of smokers if you go to Cabela's or Bass Pro, whatever. Some of the pros of these, they have really consistent, really nice smoke production, and you can choose the type of wood, pucks or pellets, whatever you want to use to change the flavor profile of your smoke. They're very easy to manage. Cons is you gotta always buy the brand specific, pucks or pellets or whatever to make them work, which is really annoying to me, especially if they go out of business. And there's a little less flexibility in cooking styles in them. So, those are a bunch of different options. You can also just build your own. There's all sorts of really cool DIY kind of stuff online where you can just build your own smokehouse and make it a hot-cold setup and all sorts of stuff. And that's what I've been really holding off on doing. I'd like to do that, build my own. And now I've procrastinated for years. It hasn't happened yet, but instead of buying a Bradley or a pellet one, I'm going to build my own one day. Getting into cold smoking, the setups are going to be a little bit different. You're not actually generating heat. You don't want to generate heat. Like, a cold smoker should be able to smoke a block of cheese without melting it. Just think of that. You're not, like I said, you're not generating heat. You're just generating the smoke itself. So that can be as simple as like a smoke tube from a heat source that cools on the way to your box where you're smoking things, or a separate smoke box feeding into a chamber. It all depends. Those setups can be very inexpensive, but they require much more attention to safety, like we mentioned, and you're probably better off sometimes going with the DIY kind of side of things there. Your simple smokehouse, your barrel smoker, offset kind of setups. You can build something really effective with really basic materials if you understand just airflow and heat. You can make it out of cinder blocks, or you can make it look like a schoolhouse, whatever you want. When you want to put like time into making it look fancy, you can. At the end of the day, all these systems are just doing the exact same thing. They're managing smoke, temperature, and time. But how much control you have and how easy it is kind of changes depending on your setup. So it's all up to you and how much money you have and how much time you want to spend on this stuff. Do you want to get into that safety thing we keep kind of mentioning, Justin?
Sure, I'd love to. This is where it gets dicey. It doesn't get dicey it gets dicey from a point of safety. The safety part's really like very simple, right? Hot smoking's pretty forgiving, and you're cooking the food, you're hitting safe temps, the risks are lower as long as you're handling things properly. Time becomes the biggest element, time and temp, the time at which things are at a certain temperature for any prolonged period, as with kind of all cooking, including like reheating or just holding things at a temperature long. Cold smoking, though, that's where it becomes a little different because you're working in that lower temperature range and bacteria just kind of blooms there. And you have to worry about things like botulism, which we don't want because that's bad. So if you're cold smoking meat or fish, you're probably going to either cure it first, keep the temperatures really controlled, beware of time, and then there's probably some reheating at the end to actually bring it up to temperature. Another factor people don't really talk about a lot when we talk about food safety is fat. So fat itself doesn't preserve well. It can go rancid. And in the wild game world, we see it probably most often with like bear. I think bear fat goes rancid pretty quickly. But also even venison fat too will go. And I mean, some of those like venison fat you don't necessarily want to be consuming, especially I would say smoked, because generally you're eating those products kind of cold after. Like if you're grilling something and the fat's dripping off and all that, we've discussed that sort of in the past of like you can develop over time a taste for it, much like Asm has for like fresh, hot grilled deer ribs, which are really good. But you may not want to play around with that as far as smoking, because that controlled temp for prolonged periods with the fat's going to change it, and not in a good way. And there's definitely a possibility it goes bad. That could affect the entirety of your cut. So just as a good rule of thumb, trim. And you can lean towards those leaner cuts. They tend to be safer and more stable. And just like drying, the storage itself matters. So even smoked food can spoil if it's not stored properly. It just generally takes a little bit more time. I've seen like smoked jerky, for instance. You put it in a bag and throw it, up on top of your refrigerator or whatever, and it kind of like molds over time, which is weird because it still has moisture content. You're sealing the air in there, and probably not a good sign to eat. I want to say though, don't be scared by this. It's a factor, right? And we have to discuss it. We have to make sure we're kind of following some general guidelines. So one thing I do want to touch on is that if you're thinking about cold smoking, let's talk about curing, because curing is going to be that vital thing that's going to kind of keep it safe. So when you're working in the lower temperature range, you're not killing bacteria. You're creating the environment, as I mentioned, where they can grow if you're not real careful. And that's where curing solves it. So using a curing salt, often called pink salt, curing salt number 1, prog powder, it adds a controlled amount of nitrite in there, which that helps prevent the growth of things like botulism. And people are like, oh, nitrates, they're going to, they're really bad for you, all these things like that. I know there's a lot of varying research out there. I would, like anything else, use it sparingly, use it purposefully, and don't overdo it. I wouldn't recommend you consuming smoked and cured meats every day of your life for the rest of your life. It's that in itself is probably not good, but I would say the same thing about ice cream. Don't.
It still kill you a lot slower than eating something botulism.
Yeah, right? So, also, too, the opposite side of that, botulism's bad, okay? And a lot of traditional cold smoking applications, those nitrates aren't optional. It's not safe to do it, and that's key. So be precise with it, use it. There's weighted measurements that kind of go along with it. It's definitely not something you want to eyeball. The ratios are there for a reason. They're generally broad across the board, your weight ratios. You've got things like equilibrium curing methods, all different kinds of stuff. Measure carefully, give the cure enough time to do its job before you introduce the smoke. And if you're planning to cold smoke things like fish, sausage, cuts of meat, don't skip the step, please. On the opposite side of that, hot smoking is a bit more forgiving because you're cooking the food at the same temp. But once you're cold smoking, you're stepping into preservation territory, and that comes with a higher level of responsibility. So you're swinging the pendulum back to kind of curing.
Yeah, definitely. Once you start applying some of this stuff, this smoking and curing and cold smoking, hot smoking stuff to wild food, things open up pretty quickly, which is the kind of fun part about all this. Fish is probably the most obvious place, and it's something most of us have probably tried if we like fish. Trout, salmon, whitefish, things like fatty fish like mackerel and stuff. These all take to the smoke really, really well. And anyone who has had smoked salmon knows that because it's so freaking delicious.
It's so ironic that the fat is the part that goes rancid, but also the fat's the part that absorbs the smoke. We think about brisket. Yeah, brisket's not really a lean cut. It comes with a bit of marbling, and it's tougher cut, but it's got kind of the fat mixed throughout, and that's what really absorbs the smoke.
Yeah, it's true, and that's why I think where we're going more for the flavor additions rather than the shelf stableness or shelf stability, I should say, about some of the stuff. You can smoke a brisket and it's not going to be able to sit on your counter for 2 weeks, but it tastes freaking good. That's kind of where we're harnessing smoke in different ways in modern era. But you can picture back to fish, hot smoking. Think of that kind of thick piece of opaque pink salmon, and it's really rich and flaky and just got that kind of golden reddish hue from the smoke. That's the hot smoked salmon. Cold smoking gives you something more closer to kind of preserved fish, so it's firmer, saltier, it's a little longer lasting. So think of those those thinly sliced, almost translucent smoked salmon ribbons that you might find like on a bagel or something like that. That's the cold smoked versus the hot smoked, so just to kind of get into your head there. And, that really works well with trout. It works with Arctic char. It works with a lot of different things. And hot smoking works really well for, sturgeon and for whitefish, all sorts of stuff. So like goldeye, I think, out west, it's, there's just lots of really good fish. And generally, the fattier, the better for that kind of stuff, which goes a little against what we just said. But we're not looking to preserve these fish for a long time. And I think the unsaturated fat of fish reacts really differently than the heavily saturated fat of ungulates. So maybe there's some science behind there that I'm not going to try to get into and make things up as we do this podcast. But big game is a little more variable. Lean cuts like backstrap can be smoked, but you have to be careful not to dry them out. And that's a problem with wild game, is that it often gets dried out when we're leaving it for long times at these temperatures. Shoulders, roasts, those kind of things do better, especially when you're thinking in terms of like longer cooks and slowly breaking things down. Having that connective tissue, just like Justin said, the brisket versus say like a filet mignon or something, the brisket's going to do better slowly cooked on the smoker. In terms of the best animals to smoke, I would say it's probably wild hog. Would you agree with that, Justin?
Yeah, I do. Maybe we'll talk about it later. I've got a beautiful whole shoulder smoked hog recipe that exists both on our website, and it's going to be featured in the Cooking by Cuts book is a good way to smoke whole wild game. I think wild pig does phenomenally. I mean, it though the fat content's a bit different, the meat itself I think absorbs flavor much like domestic pig does. Like it's really, really well.
And that intramuscular fat, wild pigs tend to have a little bit more than other wild animals due to their diet, and that fat isn't quite as saturated, doesn't have as much stearic acid and everything in it, so it's going to be much nicer on the palate. And it behaves a little more like domestic pork than like, say, venison behaves like beef, I would say.
Which I think very interesting, because if we think back if we think back to the introduction of wild pigs in North America, but also very much how they were utilized throughout, I would say, probably Europe and other parts of the world, they were in fact in the wild phase, in wild feral, and much of it like the Spanish when they were, what's his name, De Soto or whatever, when he was kind of marching across North America, carrying a slew of pigs with him, like they were wandering off, they were coming around, they were eating things that were on the ground. They weren't like grain-fed, finished pigs that we see now in the grocery store. They were in fact very close to being fully wild, and we can see that in its natural evolution of the way that how quickly pigs can turn feral, which is very, very interesting. So with all that said, we've got a traditionally wild animal paired with a traditionally wild method that works really well together. But nonetheless, all the other game animals, despite what people say or debate, do really well with smoke. It just requires a little more attention.
And another little brief history interlude here. In Jamaica, they were smoking wild pigs, which had been let go by the Spanish at some point or another, or Europeans anyways. And they were smoking them over pimento wood, which is, allspice berries. They come from the pimento tree. So they smoke over pimento wood, and then they created this really crazy kind of spice paste to go along with, which is jerk. And that kind of barbecue system that they developed there was for wild pigs specifically. It used smoke from a scented wood, which is really interesting, just like we use apple or hickory or mesquite. And that was kind of the setup that mixed with, Scottish traditions and German traditions and African traditions and created the barbecue that America knows today. And it all stems from wild pigs and smoking. So kind of cool. So barbecue really kind of draws its beginnings from that time, which is neat.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Stepping away from pigs for the time being, we're going to move into birds, which are awesome for smoking too. Duck and goose especially, once more because they have a little more juiciness, a little more intramuscular fat and everything that lets them take that smoke really well. And then if you're pluck them, the skin actually acts like a basting method. So it's just slowly rendering fat out. The fat's not going to interact the same way that like that kind of Hirsch or deer fat does. You got to make sure you're managing fat and temperature, because wild duck and goose, the breasts especially, can get really dry and crumbly and gross. Pheasants, grouse, turkey, and other leaner birds like those also benefit from smoking, but usually from a shorter smoking time or being combined with other methods like curing and whatever, just to be able to not dry them out. Sausages made of any of the above are always an excellent choice for smoking as well. So smoked sausages, there's something just incredible about them, and I think it's partly because of that juiciness as well that they hold. Then you got things like your mushrooms. And mushrooms don't preserve the same way under smoke that meat does, but they do kind of act like sponges, and they absorb flavor incredibly well. So even short exposure to smoke can completely change how they taste. And I have a recipe on my website for tar smoked puffball mushrooms. And I just did them on my buddy's pellet grill, kind of brushed them with oils, tar spice, and we smoked them, sliced into planks, and that was incredible. That was probably the best way I've ever enjoyed puffball mushroom in my life. You know, it just needed a little bit of that smoke flavor to kind of enhance it, and it was really cool. So all this is to say, smoking isn't just about preservation. It's more about transformation, especially nowadays, and you're trying to transform something into something with more richness and new flavors and all that stuff. And I just wanted to mention, while we're talking about all this stuff, liquid smoke, which I think is worth talking about briefly. Gets a pretty bad reputation being artificial smoke, but it's not actually as artificial as people think, which is the interesting thing about it. It's actually made by capturing real wood smoke while burning said wood, so that smoke gets pulled through a cooling system where it condenses back into a liquid, kind of like steam turning back into water in like a still or something. And the heavier tars and ash get separated out during this process, leaving behind the cleaner, more flavorful smoke compounds that we mentioned at the beginning. And what you're left with is a concentrated version of smoke flavor, just from basically taking the condensation of smoke and harnessing that. Used properly, it can be very effective, but the key is definitely restraint, because it's not the same taste as smoking as like a smoked product. It does have like, I don't want to say an artificial, but it has a taste, like a liquid smoke taste. And a few drops does you good. If you're using tablespoons, it's way too much. You're not going to get the same, like that smoked brisket we talked about, or a smoked wild hog. Like, you're not going to get the same thing if you just mix a bunch of liquid smoke into it. But where a little hint of smoke works really nice in using liquid smoke is, you know, to add to a sauce or to a marinade, or maybe just something that can't be easily smoked, or maybe you don't have the time or inclination to smoke something, but you want to just have like a little bit of that flavor in your barbecue sauce or something. That's where liquid smoke can really come in handy. Otherwise, I recommend don't try to replace smoked meat with fresh meat and liquid smoke. Just use it as a little enhancer along the way. Do you ever use liquid smoke at all at home?
It's been a while. It's been a pretty long time. Generally, like, I'm similar to you. If I like want to smoke something, I carve out time in my schedule to like purposefully smoke it. I think the most common thing I've done in the past with the liquid smoke would be like using it as a marinade for like jerky or something that I'm going to put in a dehydrator versus putting on the smoker to smoke. And in reality, you can do either one. It just depends on how long you want to, you know, tend fires or run smokers or whatever to smoke it. So yeah, I think it's a tool in the tool chest. I don't think I would use it as frequently. Not to like poo-poo on people that do, because whatever, like, do what makes you happy. Use the tools you have, but like as a personal note for me, I would shy away from it. Although now I'm super curious about how I recreate this smoke flavor. Like, can I do this myself? Can I condense smoke? Like, I don't know.
I think you can, and I think it just takes some simple things like a bowl of ice and a fire and a couple little simple tools. Yeah. And the interesting thing would be to get liquid smoke that's flavored by, say, pimento wood, or say if you have a really cool local wood that's has interesting flavors, you could actually make a liquid smoke out of that, which is kind of cool.
So let's talk a little bit about some crossover methods. This could be techniques where we combined smoking with some other preservation method. I've like hinted at it a couple times, but let's actually do it. So just like drying, smoking kind of rarely exist on its own. And a lot of the best results come from combining the methods. So you might cure then smoke, you might smoke then dry, you might smoke and cook it further. Jerky's a good example. Like I mentioned, a lot of traditional jerkies are actually light smoked before drying, or they're smoked and dried at the same time, with that time element being the biggest thing. Same with fish, smoked then air dried. Once you start to understand what each method does, you can start sort of like layering them together. So here's some mistakes you want to avoid. Once you start getting into smoking, these mistakes come up over and over again, especially when you're doing it at home. And the good thing is most of them are pretty easy to fix once you know what's going on. And one of the biggest one is too much smoke. I bet you thought I'd never admit that. But yeah, people tend to think that more smoke equals more flavor, but that's not really how it works. What you're looking for is a thin, steady stream of clean smoke, not thick, billowing clouds. If your smoke is heavy and white, you're usually getting incomplete combustion, and that's where you start to pick up bitter, almost acrid flavors. It's a word I don't use often. So this fix is pretty simple, like better airflow, smaller fires, let your wood burn clean before the food goes on it. So think about even airflow being one of the biggest things. While yes, you can completely submerge things in smoke in like a smokehouse that's sealed up and all that, but there's still a path for that smoke to escape. So passing that airflow through over time really works well, as we've seen throughout history. Another really common issue is temperature control. When people are starting out, people tend to chase the fire, opening vents, adjusting constantly, overcorrecting, and what it does, it creates swings in temperature instead of stability. So most smoked foods do better with consistency versus precision. So instead of trying to hit an exact number, it's better to settle on a range. Especially I find this a lot with like wood smokers where you're having to refresh logs and stuff like that. Generally the way that I would do it is like if I identify I'm going to add a log in, I'll add the log in, I'll let the log catch, and then I'll adjust my airflow damper after it's kind of caught, because the heat's going to come up. You're going to close it off a little bit, then you're going to open it back up. And that's really important to kind of keep that within a big temperature, because otherwise you get like, you add a log, it jumps up to like 700 degrees, and now you're grilling and your smoked meat's all charred that's closest to like where the heat's coming through, and then you're going to let that log burn out, and slowly over time it's going to fade. And so like those big swings are not helpful. So drying out lean meat, so wild game, especially venison, it can go from like perfect to overdone pretty quickly. There's not a lot of moisture present in the meat, especially things like front shoulders or roast. You can't treat it like domestic fatty meat. So lower the temperatures. Your smoke times are going to play a big key. I don't think shorter smoke times are always the key. You might have to do a combination of like smoking, then following up with some sort of like baking or oven or slow cooker, braising to like help you with that moisture level. Or one of the biggest things is adding fat and wrapping is probably, or basting, or a combination of all those kind of throughout. Depends on how much attention you want to spend. If you're going to smoke wild game, I think that's one of those things I recommend, like carving out some time to intentionally like smoke wild game. Don't try to like halfway do it. But I've seen a lot of people, and I agree with this, of like start on the smoker and then move it into the braising pot or the slow cooker or whatever. And that's like a really successful way. I'm thinking back to a buddy's like smoked raccoon slider dish that I had back in Maryland a year or so ago, and it was pretty phenomenal. So that's a great one. So another one is
awesome.
It comes up a lot. Not seasoning or pre-treating enough. Smoke's not a substitute for seasoning. It's a layer. So if you go in with under-seasoned meat, expect under-seasoned meat. So whether you're dry brining, you're doing salt cure, marinade, whatever, build flavor before it hits the smoke. I mean, even if you're just going basic like S&P, like that's going to get you a long way. Another cool method for that is like seasoning your basting. It's very common in, I would say, like Texas old school pit smoke barbecue to have like your baste is running on your smoker as well, and that's like got a stock and a fat and like jalapenos and spices and stuff in it. So as you're like, as it's smoking as well, and that fat's absorbing that smoke flare, but then also too, you're like basting the meat with that smoky flavored moisture providing baste, and it's really, really good. So
that sounds so awesome to me.
Yeah, no,
I just love the thought of that.
Yeah, it's really, really great. A good mop sauce goes a long way.
Yeah.
Big one, especially with cold smoking, is skipping the cure or rushing the process, right? We touched on this earlier. Safety. Lean for the cure, please. And also, too, like that, I won't say that cure doesn't add flavor, because it does, and it's an opportunity for you to add flavor into the meat through that like osmosis process, which is really, really interesting. It's critical. Just be safe, please. Another one is overcrowding the smoker. If you pack it in too much, it'll restrict the airflow. Airflow, it's what carries both the heat and the smoke. So instead of everything smoking evenly, you end up with uneven cooking, inconsistent flavor. It's going to take you longer. So space things out, use some racks, do whatever you need to do. And then the one that people don't really talk about as much, especially as we've evolved into this electric smoker world, because it kind of has taken that out, is the quality of your wood. You want to make sure that your wood's not too wet. You definitely don't want to use treated wood, and don't use wood that's not really commonly smoked.
I love that pressure treated flavor.
Oh, it's great. It's great. Yeah. Nothing better than that like green 2x4 you toss in there to add a little bit of smoke in there.
A little railroad tie.
Yeah, bad wood's going to give you off flavors, like kind of no matter what. So whenever you're doing this, stick with properly seasoned hardwoods are really good. You know, there's a reason we use mesquite. There's a reason we use apple. There's a reason we use oak. There's a reason we use all these different woods. That's because they're good for smoking. This is going to go a long way. So think about like building a house. You start with a good foundation, right? You don't start with crazy other things and then kind of build from there. So at the end of the day, you can avoid some of these mistakes, kind of just thinking through the process. Like we say, everything, read the recipe all the way through, understand what you're doing, and then start the process. Don't just jump into it. And if you do, understand you're going to have to make changes along the way. So once you get the balance right, it becomes easier to smoke and probably a lot more enjoyable. And maybe you'll be like tending the smoker for that long 8-hour smoke whilst napping and entertaining your dog. I don't know.
Yeah.
So
having a couple beers.
Yeah.
So. It's one of those things that it's going to be a bit of a learning curve, but the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. And even stuff that turns out only okay is actually pretty good. I've found when it comes to smoking, even your failures taste pretty good, and you can always chop your failures up into a chili and have a smoky chili, which tastes delicious, right? So there's ways to recover from that. If you're looking for a place to start with smoking, hot smoking is definitely the easiest entry point. It's probably something you should do. Something like trout is very easy, quite accessible to find from the grocery store or the lake or creek. You just want to salt it lightly, let it sit for a bit, smoke it at low temperature till it's cooked through but still moist, and there you have it. That's all it takes. That's something you can really play with. That's not too expensive, and you can test all your boundaries and everything. Trying out a venison roast, just keep it simple to start. Salt, pepper, maybe a little bit of garlic. Let the smoke do the work. Don't overcomplicate it. From here, you can get into pretty fun stuff. We have lots and lots of fantastic smoking recipes on the Harvesting Nature website. Do you want to go through a couple of them?
Yeah, I got one pulled up right here. Yeah, let's do citrus smoked venison shank. Boom, my favorite. Shanks and praises. This is that method. So even though shanks tend to be like a very tough cut of meat, smoking them for a prolonged period, as long as you're kind of controlling what's going on, you can do it well, and it comes apart, and they're really good, as long as you're kind of using some liquid and stuff like that. So for this is really great. Citrus smoked venison shank. So you got water, oil, you got a bunch of spices, some braising liquid, which you're going to end up doing that. So essentially all that stuff, all the ingredients. You want to preheat your smoker 225. While you're waiting, mix oil and water in a baking dish, and this is 2 tablespoons of oil and a quarter cup of water. You're going to kind of set that aside. You're going to take your rub and coat the shanks, and then you're going to place your seasoned shanks inside the dish, the baking dish that you just put water and stuff in. You're essentially braising in the smoker, kind of, which is interesting. So you're going to cook them for an hour at 125. That's going to get them some smoke flavor because you're at a lower temp, right? And then you're going to use your braising liquid, which is going to be a cup of wild game stock, a bunch of thyme, garlic cloves, barbecue sauce. You're going to add that into the dish as well, and then you're going to let that cook for a little longer at 225. with the braising liquid in there. That's going to give some smoke flavor to the braising liquid again. And then I would recommend covering this. The recipe doesn't say cover it, but I'm going to say it. We'll go ahead and cover it, raise the temp to 250, and cook it until it hits 195. The recipe says 175, but I'll say 195 because that's the point in which your shanks are going to kind of fall apart. Remove from heat, allow it to cool, shred the meat, and then reserve the braising liquid for a sauce. You can enjoy that over polenta. I did polenta, sauteed mushrooms, braising liquid, all that fun stuff. Yummy.
Nice. I always love the picture of that dish. It makes my mouth water every time. So I'm going to do a recipe from our friend Sean West, a fellow Ontarian. This one's for smoked goose hearts with lemon dressing. And I just wanted to highlight something that you don't always just have to smoke a shoulder or whatever. You can get into some really interesting things as well. So what he does is takes 12 to 16 Canada goose hearts. Pretty easy to come by if you're team hunting with other guys because most people don't want it. So I always go home with lots of goose hearts. You just basically toss some oil and some seasonings like chipotle pepper, garlic powder, cumin, salt and pepper. Sean used a pellet grill on the high smoke setting to about 200 degrees Fahrenheit with applewood pellets. You're going to add those seasoned hearts to the pellet grill, let them smoke for about 2 to 3 hours. They're going to darken and wrinkle, but the texture should still be firm, but not actually dried out. So you're not looking like a hockey puck. You're looking for a nice firmness. Remove to a bowl, cover with tinfoil, and allow them rest for 15 to 20 minutes. And then you're going to pour over a dressing made from lemon juice, garlic, olive oil, and honey. And then just, toss them to coat, sprinkle with some parsley, and then eat right out of the bowl. And those look incredible. I think they'd be really good. And there's lots of different things you can do with organ meat like that when it comes to smoke. And smoking is not just for your main cuts.
Yeah. I'll do a fish one. I got a cool one. This one's by our buddy John Vile. It's really, I think, a really good one. And this uses kind of some different methods too. So blackened smoked salmon burgers with duck fat fries. This sounds phenomenal. So essentially, you're gonna brine the salmon fillets for about 5 to 6 hours. And so our brine, we're using Tender Quick in this. So this is that salt method because we're going to be doing low. So you could replace Tender Quick with that prog powder number 1. With that, after you've let them soak in the brine, kind of curing, you're going to place them on a wire rack. Blot them with paper towels, remove the excess liquid, let them air dry for an hour or two until you get a nice pellicle, and then set your temperature on your smoker for 150. Smoke the fillets using hickory or apple, and after about an hour and a half, you're going to increase your smoker temp to 160, 170. Smoke until you hit 135 to 140 internal. Remove the salmon, let it cool. This is the cool part. Meanwhile, crank up the heat on your smoker to 425. Peel some sweet potatoes, slice them into 1/4 inch thick slices. Place the slices on a sheet pan. Coat them in duck fat, and then place the pan on the smoker. So he's using the smoker as an oven, which is great. 25 to 30 minutes. Flip the potatoes halfway through. That's really awesome. So once you got crispy fries, remove them from the smoker. Sprinkle them with some blackened seasoning, which is really good. And then back to your salmon. Remove the skins from the salmons, break up the fillets, you're going to put an egg, your blackened seasoning, breadcrumbs, give it a good mix until break salmon up into little pieces. Form some 1/3 pound patties, apply more blackened seasoning. We're going for a lot of flavor. I like it. With a spritz, some oil, place the burgers in the refrigerator for about 20 minutes to set up. That's a really key thing if you want them to hold. And then you're going to basically go back to the smoker, which still set at 425, and put a cast iron pan on there in the highest setting. Use an outdoor burner if you need to. You're really looking for a good solid sear on that. You've also got to cook that egg that's now inside your salmon patties. And when your pan's really smoking, you add the salmon burgers, cook for several minutes until they're get a nice crust on them. Remove the burgers and finish at 325 in the oven if you need to cook them all the way through. Boom. That's like, dang.
Yeah, those sound great.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I'm excited about that. I'm going to have to try that one. We're big salmon. We like eating salmon here.
Yeah. So I'm just going to really quickly run through the last one. It's actually I think it might be our most popular recipe on the Harvesting Nature website. It's been on there for a while. It was put up originally by Corey Sly, who you might remember for any of you longtime podcast listeners. You might remember our buddy Corey, but he actually was given the recipe by Brad Luttrell, co-founder of Go Wild.
R.I.P.
Anyways, this is R.I.P. Go Wild. This is a smoked venison chili. And I know that's going to appeal to a lot of you guys out there. And instead of running through the whole thing, I'll let you guys go through it. But what he does is basically takes a 5-pound venison roast, smokes it until you can pull it, using like apple jelly and apple cider and a few things, kind of wet smoking it. He pulls it and then puts it into a chili, which then gets cooked also on the smoker. So he gets it in a Dutch oven, cooks the chili on the smoker itself, and that chili will start absorbing some of that smoke as well, creating this really rich, delicious kind of double layered smoking effect. And I think that would just be incredible for chili. So remember, you can actually smoke things entirely on the smoker as well. Like you can smoke a whole casserole or like your dish on it, not just the meat itself. So remember, you can add smoke in different layers and different
I've done
ways.
desserts too. Like I've done like smoked apple pies and smoked pumpkin pies and all that. I think it's very interesting when we think about the use, especially like the temperature control that the electric smokers give you. Like you can really do some precise baking on there. And at the end of the day, like these are methods that our ancestors have done for years, like smoking things over fires, like be it casseroles or cauldron soups or like all this. Like this is common. We stepped away from this for convenience and started using what a smoker or a campfire or a fireplace, ovens and microwaves started quickly, and air fryers and pressure cookers and all these things for convenience sake started replacing what we used traditionally with wood, smoke, and fire.
And I think that flavor, the missing flavor, is very obvious to me sometimes in the newfangled device cooking versus the old school. You're missing out on some of that really good traditional flavor.
And I think there's still something to be said about, inviting a couple buddies over for a beer and, sitting around a smoker or a campfire watching food cook and just like then enjoying it. Like there's something inherently communal about that I think it's not solely nostalgic. It just feels right. It's still useful, right? It preserves, it transforms, and it adds something from a flavor and a technique perspective that's hard to get some other ways. You don't need all the fancy gear to get started. Like literally a campfire works really well, and I think that'll do. We'll call it there. Also, next time on the Wild Pantry, we'll be discussing confit, rendering, and oil preservation, which is going to be super ironic because we're going to go up to Minnesota and do this very technique for a bunch of people. So we'll report back. But thanks everybody for listening. Have a good night. Later.